Maybe we could go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone to tonight's webinar, session 1 of Integration Rules in Slingerland Instruction. Couple of things to keep in mind. We do have a chat option, so if you have questions, you can go on ahead and post them in the chat, or you can use the Q&A option that is at the bottom of your, well, for some computers, it may show up at the top, but it's going to be in the Zoom webinar tools that are available along the bottom of your screen, or maybe it's the top of your screen, but you can type in questions there and we'll either respond live or we will chat back to you with responses. This is a different format. It's not the Zoom meeting rooms. We are in Zoom webinars. So you'll basically see the panelist or host videos and then the shared screen. We don't get to see the attendees at all. So if you need to talk with us, please chat with us. Send us a chat. All right. I want to thank everyone for attending. And Dr. White, will you please take over?
Okay, thank you. And Ruth, if you will keep look out on the chat, so if there are questions along the way that seem like they would be best answered at that point, if you can let me know what those questions are, then I'll try to answer them. Okay. All right, and welcome everyone. Many of you who are attending this webinar know more about this subject than I do, so please don't hesitate to contribute or offer additional information as we go along. There are also a couple of people who are relatively new to Slirling, and one person who may not have even taken the Slingerland course at all. So I'll try to make it make sense to everyone. And also, you will be part of my maiden voyage on trying to use a document reader, which could be a disaster and could be a success. We'll find out in a few minutes. Okay, so I think most of you are familiar with what we refer to as the reading rope, which integrates all of the parts of oral language and written language that contribute to the learning of literacy, as the Slingerland approach also does. And what I've tried to do, what I'm wanted to do here is briefly touch on what the major characteristics of the Slingerland approach and how each one of those feeds into the integration part of the whole approach and help to make it work. So the Slingerland approach continually revisits and strengthens known skills and concepts at the same time that new skills and concepts are being introduced. So once something is taught, it never goes away. It's always coming back, either to be expanded on or to be used in a higher level of functional use. The secret ingredient is purposeful planning of integration throughout every facet of every lesson. And this was one of the handouts that was sent yesterday, which I know that those of you who've taken the course all have a copy of this. If you can just keep it handy, because it has the whole approach, all of the pieces on one sheet, but it's very small, so I don't know how well you can see it on the screen. I also wanted to point out that although we've been using multimodal instead of multisensory, basically, as far as the way we use multisensory, there's not a difference in the definition of multimodal, but to the researchers, there's a big difference because they think of modal as more in the terms of modalities, auditory, visual, kinesthetic, that relate to language learning, whereas they think of multisensory as everything from whipped cream and sandpaper and all kinds of other things, which may be related, but are not as research-based. So this is a briefer form. So as most of you know, we veterans, The learning to write is a really important part of the Slingerland approach. Handwriting is a component, and it's where we begin. So students aren't asked to read or spell, to read words or to spell words with letters that we haven't taught them to write. And it may be that we're teaching manuscript, it may be that we're teaching cursive, but first the letter is taught for writing. And in those 4 steps, of course, learning each individual new letter, practicing single letters that have recently been learned, review of single letters, and the 4th one, teaching and practicing letter connections if we're teaching cursive, but practicing letter sequences in manuscript. I discovered, actually, it was more of a shock than a discovery, that because in summer school, when we're doing the teacher training, we're generally teaching cursive. And so what's there for number 4 is teaching and practicing letter connections. But we also have classes in summer school that aren't part of the teacher training. And some of the younger classes are manuscript classes. And I discovered that some of the teachers were not doing number 4 because they weren't doing cursive. But it's, of course, just as important to practice sequences of manuscript letters that are going to be in the words that the kids are going to have later on in the lesson, as to be practicing the connections for cursive. So just in case anybody else hasn't discovered that and it's the case, be on the lookout. So then the auditory, with the goal of independent written expression. And so the beginning with a single unit, words with suffixes and prefixes, phrases, sentences, paragraphs, and then the dictation paragraph. And of course, the goal is independent writing. On the visual side, with the goal of independent reading, but beginning with grapheme phoneme practice at the single grapheme level, starting with what the grapheme looks like and the phoneme that it's associated with, learning to identify words, single words by decoding. Preparation for reading is teaching vocabulary. So this may deal with single words that are new vocabulary, but it also is teaching phrase concept and how phrases work together to make sentences, and then the sentence is a complete thought. And the preparation for reading, what's so important with phrase concept is that it doesn't matter what the topic is, it doesn't matter whether it's narrative or expository, phrases answer the same questions that single parts of speech do, because each phrase is going to act as a part of speech, and the same for clauses. So if they get that at the single word level, then it's not such a big jump for the phrase and the clause level. And then we're pre-teaching vocabulary, we're teaching syntax and grammar along the way, as well as writing mechanics, and drawing their attention to that when they're reading, and how the punctuation and capitalization affects the comprehension. Reading from the book, connected text, beginning with very structured reading, and teaching kids to study text, ultimately with the goal of independent reading. So, simultaneous multimodal teaching strategies, and these are just the things that I'm going to briefly touch on before we do a little practice with the integration. So if we start with simultaneous multimodal, some of you may have seen this before, but we have within the brain the development and integration of phonological, orthographic, and semantic pathways. And that's exactly why the Slingerland approach is organized the way it is, to integrate in the instruction the phonological, orthographic, and semantic pathways. So first of all, the phonological pathway is integrated and connected with the orthographic pathway. And then, so sorry, I went a little faster than I was ready to. And then connects with the semantic pathway. The orthophonological pathway then is integrated with the semantic pathway. And this is just notes that for most people who aren't having difficulty with language at all, there's a huge increase in the dorsal orthophonological pathway between kindergarten and grade 3. But as we know, we can find kids at risk before kindergarten. And if we start working with them, then hopefully they will be developing this, and these pathways will also be increasing for them rather than waiting to grade 3 and finding out that it didn't happen. Not that you can't start working on it then, but it's a lot easier if you don't wait that long. And this is just really showing the huge difference in connectivity between those young children with and without a family history. It's pretty amazing, actually. And this is a simpler, just looking at the connection or the areas with the phonology and the orthography. But it's why the simultaneous multimodal integration is so important for them to be looking at it and hearing it and using the muscle, the kinesthetics, for speech and for writing. So in the summer 2020 perspectives, IDA perspectives is on the basis for the phonological connection to reading and spelling. And one of the theme editors was David Herford, and he wrote, for all students, teaching reading and spelling in tandem rather than separately can help build reading skills. A complete knowledge of the English writing system occurs when it's used not only to decode, but also to encode or write. Teaching spelling and reading together strengthens the connection between sound and print, and meaning eventually. So the alphabetic principle is the basis for the approach, beginning with the smallest unit of sight, sound, and feel. And for those of you who've been through the course, all of us have a funny story about what we didn't hear during our first summer school. I absolutely didn't hear a single person say even one time, beginning with the smallest unit of sight, sound, and feel. And you know that's impossible. You know I had to hear that a million times. But what I heard wasn't that. It might have been something that meant something similar, but at least I learned it eventually. Okay, so again, going back to our lesson plan model, so we have the letter, we're teaching them to write the individual letters, and then we start with the auditory, because that's the progression in natural acquisition of language. And they learn the sounds and the graphemes that are associated with those sounds. And then on the visual side, they're going to be practicing then the grapheme. So it's going from grapheme to phoneme and from phoneme to grapheme. But it does the Slingerland approach, because it starts with encoding before decoding, is a speech to print approach. And only reason that's blacked out, you're going to see it in a second, but just as an example of an auditory lesson, we need to know what the phrase or sentence is that the student's going to write before we can plan the rest of that auditory lesson. So in this case, David's sentence was, that loud clapping noise ruined my concentration. So he started practicing some of the letter connections where we dictated just the names of the letters, no sound symbol at all, just the names of the letters, and you could see probably why these were the OO connection, the OM, not lots of those high connections. And then the phoneme to grapheme, write what spells oo, write what spells ah, ow, oi, write the suffix that makes a base word tell what's happening, I, write the suffix that makes a word tell what happened in the past. Then the suffixal construction, it's two suffixes together actually, ation. And when it's ation, it's A-T-E plus I-O-N. So it's ank. And I don't know if I dictated the suffix ish or if I gave the meaning of ish, or probably both. But you can see, then it write all the ways you know to spell k. Circle the one you'd use right after a short vowel sound. Draw 2 lines under the most common way to spell k, and 1 line under the Greek way to spell k. And then the suffixes that make an adjective mean more or most, the letter combination wa. And then we practiced ruin, and then he was supposed to write ruining, and first he mistook it for a 111 word, but He recognized his mistake and corrected it. And concentration, noise, clap and clapping, then a phrase, loud clapping noise, ruined my concentration, and then the sentence that you started that you saw at the beginning. Now, I'm sure that any one of us who would write this would not write it exactly the same way. We wouldn't have exactly the same letter connections to practice. We wouldn't have the exact same phoneme to grapheme associations. And that's for two reasons. Part of the reason is our individual styles for what we're doing, although we're still basing it on the kid. And so whoever the student is, one student may not have trouble with high connections and may only need to do 2 or 3 of those letter connections. And another student might need to do more practicing with the 1-1-1 rule before they actually got to the phrase or the sentence. And it may be that you don't have the phrases that come exactly from the sentence, but you have ones that are similar. And it all depends upon the amount of, well, it depends upon a lot of things, but the most important piece is that what you're doing is connected. So think of it as a puzzle, and all the puzzle pieces fit together. So you're leading up to that sentence at the end, but you need to know what it is first. You can't do the first part before you know what that ending is going to be. Okay, so most of you are familiar with DeHaan, and he makes the point, simply is not true that there are hundreds of ways to learn to read. When it comes to reading, we all have roughly the same brain. It's kind of disappointing, isn't it? That imposes the same constraints and the same learning sequence. Now, of course, there are always individual differences, but he's making the point is that the way we teach reading matters. So all children, regardless of their socioeconomic backgrounds, benefit from explicit and early teaching of the correspondences between letters and speech sounds. Remember, Mrs. Slingerland's goal was to take Orton Gillingham, which was designed for older students who had already exhibited difficulty, and it was a remedial approach for it to be preventive and to be used with younger children before they had experienced failure in school. When you think of what a perfect tier 1 intervention the Slingerland approach would be, or not would be, is. It's just not being realized in enough places. Regardless of their social background, children who do not learn letters and graphemes suffer from reading delays. Have you ever met a kid who decided he wasn't going to learn to read when he went to school? I mean, what would be in it for him not to? They suffer from reading delays that are often far from negligible and may persist for many years. And they get worse, they don't just go away. This is a well-established fact corroborated by a great many classroom experiments and coherent with our present understanding of how the reader's brain works. So then teaching to the intellect, teaching strategies for solving language problems, figuring things out, discouraging rote memorization so that they really know what they're talking about. Because when they do, they'll use it when we're not there, which is of course our goal. So students who are successful problem solvers, when a student comes to an unfamiliar word and uses systematic decoding strategies, he's solving a language problem. When he has to add a suffix to a word and he decides what kind of word is this before I try to add the suffix, he's solving another kind of language problem. Students who are successful problem solvers develop confidence in their competence to solve problems. And again, then they do it when we're not there, which is the point. This confidence motivates them to tackle the challenge of solving problems of all kinds, with us or without us. These are the students who choose to use strategies independently and functionally in and out of school. People with fixed, oh, this is just going along with the Dweck thing. It's not as specific to what we're talking about. Okay, so one of my favorite quotes of Mrs. Slingerland is, we can never teach them all they need to know, but we can teach them to think. We could use a lot more thinking these days. So I hope you can see this. It looks kind of light on my screen now. This is a high school student in summer school. It was a 4-week summer school. It was 3.5 hours. It wasn't a demo class. But what I want, so as far as the integration, he practiced just 2 or 3 connections and he was having trouble. And note too that this was in Dubai, so some of the letter formations, the W and the V were pointed instead of round, and their F and S and R were a different formation, and the B. But anyway, so in this case was write the final stable syllable shun, all the spellings that they knew. So some of these were had to do with the morphemes, and some of them had to do with simple phoneme grapheme. And write the Greek spelling, or the main spelling of the Greek suffix that means with or together. And the new base element that meant to step, they had learned that one that day, GRADE and GRASS. It's like SCRIPT and SCRIBE. It's 2 bases, but they're from the same, they're the same base with different spellings, and they're used in different parts of speech. And so then once they had, when we got to the words, then it wasn't dictating the word, but dictate the word that means to step down, or usually DE is a prefix. It does mean down or apart, but it often has a negative connotation. So it was probably dictated somewhat in that way. Can you use the base that means to step into an adjective that means step by step, or slowly, 1 step at a time? Or can you turn it into a verb that would tell what happens when you finish 12th grade? Can you turn that into a noun that names the idea? And then we switch to a different one. So we still have the to step, it's the other spelling. Forward, so to step forward or to move forward. Progress, you can make that into a noun. Can you change it into an adjective? Another word that would mean to step back and not be making progress, but be going backward instead of forward. Make that into an adjective. And then the AG is the assimilated prefix that's really AD, but when it's used before the base GRESS, then it changes to a G. So if someone's aggressive or is showing aggression, then they're moving into a situation, not away from it. Anyway, you get the idea here. And then CUSS, which is to shake. They had fun with that one. They had learned, CUSS was a base that they had learned previously, but to think about a discussion as shaking, if you think of dis as away or apart, shaking ideas apart in a discussion. It's kind of what happens. So we had a little trouble with that connection. Then the base that means, anyway, the idea here is that we're integrating the morphology with which would be the semantics, with the spelling and the phonology. So, oops. Then skills to functional use in every single lesson. There are a lot of structured literacy approaches that focus on the skills, but do not give the same attention to using the skills functioning. And that was the way Mrs. Slirling designed that lesson plan that came in the handout, what I call the road map, or the instructional map for Slirling instruction. Every single piece of every single lesson had a purpose, and it connected to every other one. It's quite amazing how it all works so perfectly. So, independent and functional use with understanding. There's also, I often have discussions with people about, they'll say, well, she knows that. Well, I feel like I'm on the hot seat. What's the definition of know? I mean, does know mean that when you see TH, you know that it's a T and an H? Does it mean that when you see the TH, you know that it might spell 2 different phonemes? Does it mean that when you see a word with TH, you know how to figure out how to pronounce the word? Does it mean that if you hear a word with the phonemes that TH represents, can you figure it out? There are a lot of different levels of know. And just because somebody can pick out something in a test where they're seeing things in isolation doesn't mean they know it at a very high level. I mean, it might, but it doesn't necessarily. So exposure to instruction does not mean that a student has learned, unfortunately. A new learning has been mastered only when the student can put it to functional use with reasonable independence and understanding. And when kids memorize a lot of rules and they don't know when to use which rule, then they don't have information that can be useful to them when they need it the most. Ability to use what has been presented comes from continuing practice and integration with other learnings, both past and new, and always asking the kids to explain why they made a choice, because the more they know about why they made that choice, the more likely it is that they can use that thinking on their own. Each new learning must be practiced for functional use and integrated with past learnings to provide the basis for the next step. So back to our little skeleton again, we've got the learning to write, which leads right into the auditory lesson with the goal of independent writing and includes spelling. And on the visual side, beginning always with that single unit, but ending with independent reading is the goal. So I don't know, this, I did not create this, but I love it and I use it a lot. And if you think about the triangle, at the very beginning, when we're first starting, before the kids have learned to write any of the letters, we're spending a lot more time up here at the skill level and not so much time further down at the functional use level. I mean, in summer school, that first week, a lot of our time is spent teaching those letters. We need some tools to work with, and letters are those tools. So we have to teach enough letters that we can make words both for reading and for spelling. But very quickly, you're never going to stop practicing the skills or teaching new ones, but then you're spending less time on the pieces and more time on functional use. And so that the whole triangle is inverted. And this takes out just the C part of the lesson plan on both the auditory and visual side. A and B would be teaching skills and practicing the pieces. And C and D on both the auditory and visual sides are putting those pieces to functional use. And there are a lot of similarities. Something happened there. I don't know how that ended up totally wacko as far as the spacing. At one point they were parallel, but not anymore. So sorry about that. Anyway, so for spelling, if we dictate a sentence, on the visual side, we're teaching them I-span for being able to note the words that they need to chunk into meaningful phrases. Well, when they're listening to a sentence or listening to something that's read to them, they need to do the same thing, but this time it's ear span rather than eye span. They're still thinking about those same questions that a phrase is going to answer, and either you're using the punctuation when you're reading to get meaning from what someone else has written, or you're creating sentences with punctuation so that the person who's going to read what you've written is going to be meaningful to the reader. And of course, vocabulary, the rhythm or prosody, and phrases, clauses, the grammar concept. And concept markers is like a contraction, which has an apostrophe. So the apostrophe would be the concept marker. Same thing, the apostrophe also can be used to mark the concept of possession. And I don't know, I think this is the same one that I just showed you, but in this case, just as an example of skills to functional use on a kid's paper. Now, these next probably 10 or 12 slides, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them because the part 2 is going to be focused totally on auditory and part 3 totally on visual, but I felt I just wanted to put a couple of little samples in here. So if this is the passage that a student or a group would be reading, then we would choose words and phrases to present ahead of time in preparation for reading. So this is just showing the phrases that might be taken from that passage. And as I said, we'll spend more time on this in part 3. These are the phrases then listed as separate phrases. And then this is showing the clues that might be used for those particular phrases. Another thing that you might do on that visual site is you might take words that the student has already learned how to decode and have a review list in addition to whatever you're teaching as a new skill for decoding, so that they're practicing before they read the passage words that they can decode, which will make it easier for them when they get there. Will also reminds them of all the words they know how to figure out on their own. And this is just showing some examples of higher level. This is a science passage, that a middle school science passage. And you see in this case, I noted that the base VERT and VERSE, it's another set of twin bases. And so I focused on that. And then this is just, again, more time in part 3, but how you would do the structuring in step 1 of reading from the book, and then have students study aloud, but do it in a way that you can hear the phrases, study silently to read for specific information, and then have them go back and actually read and perhaps write answers to questions. But again, so you're stimulating thought, you're projecting thought, and then you're extending thought sometimes with what you ask them to do after they're thoroughly familiar with the passage and the meaning of it. And this is just showing a way you can focus on that base to expand it past how it was used in the passage. And there, I don't know if it's here. It's in the reference list that came with the PowerPoint handout that I sent today. And so it's called Matrix Maker. And listen, if I can do it, anybody can do it. The directions are very simple. So it's a link in the bibliography. And this is taking it a little further. I mean, this is probably further than most of us would need to go with most of our students, unless they're in high school or college, and then you might need to take that. And in that case, you can, we used Edem Online to take it a little further. Then what's the meaning of energy as in science, as in physics, or I should have said in science in general, in physics in particular, and according to Aristotle, and how it's changed. How the denotation, what the denotation was to begin with, and how the connotation has changed over time. So back to our outline again. And the point here is that the goal always of every single thing we do is independent writing and independent reading. That's where we're going, but it's a long road to get there. These are some examples that were in the practical guide showing how to integrate copying with preparation for reading. So if you are teaching a whole class, a task that one group of students could be working on that's totally relevant to what you're teaching them would be a list of phrases that might be the phrases that you've already used in preparation for reading. And each one of those phrases answers one of these questions. So the student would recopy the phrases and then choose. You would tell them how to fold their paper. Is that up there at the top? Yeah. So they know exactly where to put things, and then they would choose the question that goes with each of the phrases. So you're practicing the comprehension and phrase concept, but you're also practicing copying. And this is integrating copying with possessives. It could be that what you have read has one or two possessives, or you have students who are having trouble using possessives in their writing. And so you could choose words that aren't in a passage, or perhaps you choose words that were specifically ones that they needed to spell in their independent writing. But you could also choose words that you get plenty of words that have whatever the vowel graphemes are that you're teaching in decoding or spelling, and have them copy and then In the second column, rewrite the word as a non-possessive. Comprehensive and purposefully integrated language arts. And it's within one direct instruction approach. So it's all of the pieces that lead to literacy, starting with oral language. And this is just a shorter way of saying the same piece. And what I thought I had figured out how this would work remotely. The fact that I can't see you or hear you is making this a little difficult. I really do feel like I'm talking to myself for an hour and a half because I am. But in the handout that came today, if you had time to see it, there were a list of sentences like this. And I'm not suggesting, you can see there are several pages of them. What I was hoping to do was to choose a couple. And I thought I was going to be able to hear you, even though, and it was a small group, and I thought that would work. I didn't realize the difference between a webinar and a meeting. That was my fault. And I'm sorry that I didn't know what I needed to know. But what I can do, if I stopped the share, okay. Well, I got to go back to the share because I got to show you what comes next. Okay, sorry. Okay, so if you don't have access to these sentences, then I can leave it up here for you to see. But in the handouts that came yesterday, okay, there was also this lesson plan template. And so what I thought would be useful to do and fun to do would be to choose one of the sentences and work together. If we were in a group, you know, there could be two of you could work together. We've done that, but we can't do that because you're in different places. So knowing what the sentence is, which would be the end result down here. Oops. So that the sentence that's going to be written down here, okay, well here. And then write what all the parts of the lesson plan, starting with learning to write and letter connections. And I can't even see your faces, to see if you think that's a ridiculous idea or if you think it's a good one. So I'll just have to pretend, and I'll be optimistic and hope you think it's a good one. But so if you did print that off yesterday, then you have that lesson plan. So the problem is, I don't want to be the one who's deciding what we write, and I don't know. Could that be in the chat perhaps? Shall we try it?
I've just set it where everyone can unmute themselves, and if they want to speak, they can.
Okay. Then let's start by having somebody choose the sentence you'd like to work on first. There's a lot of choices here. They have numbers. Maybe I should show them on the actual.
How about number 6? The smug dude on the swift raft fell into the pond and became completely drenched.
Okay. All right. So thank you. So the smug dude on the swift raft fell into the pond and became completely drenched. So just looking at that, before we decide how we're going to fill out the lesson plan, what are some things that you can tell from that sentence that have already been taught?
Floss rule.
All right. And tell me your evidence for that one.
The word fell.
Right. Okay. So fell, or the FLS, or the floss rule's been taught. What else?
The suffix ly and ed.
Okay. Ly and ed. And if ly and ed have been taught, you can be pretty sure what other suffix has been taught.
ing.
Ing. Right. And there might be others, but we know those for sure. What about the, what vowel sounds do you think have been practiced in encoding, and what vowel graphemes in decoding?
Vowel consonant E.
Right. And if vowel consonant E has been taught, what came before that?
Your short sounds.
All the
Right,
short
the
vowels.
vowel consonant, right? The vowel consonant closed syllable sound for sure. And it may be that all of the chances are, if E consonant E is there, which it is, and complete, then it's probably a good guess that all 5 of the vowel consonant E's, including the 2 sounds of U, have been taught. And that there's no other evidence in that sentence to say that there would be others. What about red flag words?
The, on,
And
Wait, okay, so I heard the, and what was the next one?
on.
Is on a red flag word? Isn't that a short O?
You're right.
Okay.
and
And is that a red flag word? It's a high frequency word, but it's
Yes.
not unpredictable.
okay.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now, there's one other thing. So we said ED and LY, you said, and then what I want you to look at the E. Is there only one word in there that has an ED? Yes. And what do you notice about that ED? The first way we would teach ED is to add it to a verb to make it tell what happened in the past. But in that drenched, that's not it is a verbal, but it's not a verb. How's it being used? Became actually is a linking verb, not a helping verb. So what is drenched doing in that sentence?
It's an adjective.
Yeah.
It's an adjective. So
It's
it's
saying
a,
how, describing how.
well, not if you can't do it kind of seems like it's how, except if it's how, it would have to be an adverb.
Okay.
But I understand. I mean, it does feel like it's a how. Became is a linking verb that is not one of the ones that we always expect to be. But anyway, it's an adjective, and it's who or what is it describing?
The smug dude.
Smug dude.
That smug dude. He might not be so smug anymore now that he's drenched. Okay, so I'm only bringing that up because if you are going to use a word, I mean, if you're going to use the ED in that way, in a past participle, which be an adjective, you don't have to teach them it's a past participle, but it is an adjective, then you just need to make sure you teach it that way, because it's not going to be telling what happened in the past, because it doesn't mean that something happened. Okay, so with that in mind, what letter connections would you consider?
WI.
Okay, what I'm gonna try to do, I don't know if this will work, but I'll remember WI. If it doesn't work, then I'm gonna try to write them on here, but I don't know if it's gonna work, but I'm gonna try. And then, because I have a copy of the thing, I have a copy of the sentence sample sentences. I said that with a lot of confidence, didn't I? So what the heck did I do with it? It's back here on the printer still. Oh, I'll just print it again. Okay, so you have if you have yours, then you can write it on yours too, but just tell me and I'll write what you tell me to write for anybody who doesn't. So WI I heard.
Mhm.
And tell me why.
It's a high connection.
Right? Any others?
What about FT?
Is that F? F is
FT.
FT. And tell me why you chose that one.
Because I think sometimes going from an F to a T, it's an upward.
Right, and the F is the only 3-space lowercase letter.
Yeah.
So sometimes kids don't remember to make it 3 spaces, so that's okay. It doesn't, there are a lot of right answers to this, but I thought it would be useful and interesting to hear what what reasons are for choosing it, because we wouldn't all do it exactly the same
They
way.
also write the F strangely by making the bottom loop go to the left.
Yeah, sometimes they do that, don't they? Like a Q.
Yeah, and then ON because it's a hard connection.
Yeah, okay. Anything else?
Yeah, the suffix ED,
All
And
right, so you would say
the
ED.
suffix LY.
All right. I might want to put the capital letter at the beginning just to be sure. And but what was it? Because now I can't see it.
TH.
The T.
Okay, TH. So it's not much, not a very hard one, is it? Okay. Uh-oh, now I don't know what I did. Could you see what I was writing
Yes.
when I was writing?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So now I gotta get, all right. And so T, H. Okay. So for the auditory cards, we could list the oral auditory cards, or we could just go to the written, but I will let you decide.
You know, Nancy, it's MJ. I kind of like to also put the easier words up in the top, like the word and the.
Oh, okay. Okay. So you would say and, you'd say A and D. Yeah.
Right, right.
That's
Write the word and, A-N-D. Write the word the, T-H-E. Write the word on, O-N. Because by the time these kids are in 3rd or 4th grade, they kind of know, most of them know those. So,
Mhm.
all right.
Okay. Anything else?
B-E for become.
What was that?
B-E for become.
BE, that, and what B, the connecting E to any high connecting letter is always tricky because you have to dip down further than usual.
And I would practice O-M because of the 3
Yeah.
O to M
Downstrokes.
3 downstrokes.
Yeah.
What about PL? Because they're having to form.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that
There's a lot there.
because we're doing hypothetical because we don't know who the kid is. Depending upon who the kid is, I mean, we don't want to have so many that we don't get through the whole lesson. But every one of these you've given me you gave me for a reason, and you might not have all of these because you'd have a kid in mind or a class in mind when you were doing it, whereas we don't. But all of the reasons you've given me are good reasons to practice those letter connections. And it is based upon what you're going to have the kid write at the end. So we could just say, assuming when we think that he's only learned the short vowel sounds, the vowel consonantes, we know that for sure. And we don't know how many consonants, but probably a good number. I'm just going to put for auditory card, for oral cards, I'm just going to write all. That solves the problem. And then which ones would you have them write? So write what spells.
Maybe the M.
Okay.
I like to do the vowels that are in the sentence.
Yeah, I might even, if since they just have the short and vowel consonant E, I might want to do all of the vowels in written, but for sure the ones that are in it. And so
U consonant, I consonant, A consonant, E consonant.
okay, but not all together. So I'm going to leave a space.
Yeah,
Say it again. U consonant, I consonant. Is that what you said? Sorry.
A consonant, E consonant.
Okay. And then you can put, are there any digraphs?
There are, yes, CH.
Okay. And we don't know if they know more than one way to spell it. So we'll assume that they don't.
You need to do vowel consonant E, U consonant E, whatever. E consonant E.
E consonant E. And we're going to assume that, and I could show that like this, and since they've only learned one, or I could have written E consonant E, either one. But I mean, once they know a lot of multiple spellings, then I would tend to just put the sound. What I can't. What are the other long vowel sounds that were?
What are you going to do with become? Became, I mean, became.
That's a good question. If they know B, you might. There's nothing that says it's not likely that they've learned open syllable but it's also not unlikely that they could spell B. So you could tell them, you could ask that before you start, you could say the word became and show it to them. They can figure out came. Or you may know that they already know how to spell B, which is why you put became in there. That's the problem when you don't know who you're teaching this to. But you definitely wouldn't assume it. So that's a very good question. You'd have to do something. Either you could put it up on the board, but I don't think you need to do that because I'm pretty sure they can spell B if they can do those other things. And I know they can figure out came. But you don't want to put it to chance. You still want to make sure.
If you were teaching them the generalization of double L, like fell, that would go in spelling.
Right, but we're assuming that that was taught previously.
Okay.
Which is why fell is in there. And since they know all the short vowel sounds, and most of those FLSC words do have short vowel sounds, not all of them, but most of them, then that would be likely. Whereas with B, it's not likely based upon the other vowel sounds and graphemes that they've learned the open syllable. But they may have learned B as a temporary red flag word, or they may have learned it just as a high frequency word because there are very, very few monosyllable open syllables with one vowel like that. I've got them in a list, but not in my head. Okay, so are there any other digraphs or consonants that you would want to practice? Or any other long vowels? Now that I figured out how to do each of these things, I want to see both things at the same time. I guess I can. Yes, I can. I can do it this way. Oops. The smug. Okay, so what about ooh, as in dude?
Yeah.
So the sound is ooh, but it may be that the only way they've learned to spell it is U consonant E as the alternate long U sound. They also need A for in came. And I think I would put N because of that drench, because that N is going to be hard to perceive all by itself. So a little practice with the N. You see what I'm talking about there? Okay. And then TO is a red flag word. So N isn't, but TO is. So if they learn TO as a red flag, it's like B. If you know that that TO and BE are words that they know and have used, then you don't need to do anything special. But you don't assume that they can spell them if you don't know. Okay, so if we're moving on to encoding, what would you be practicing in assuming that we're not going to teach a new spelling in encoding, that you're practicing what they already know, what would you want to include in your, you don't need to give me words, but just give me the vowel sounds that you would want to include in vowel discrimination.
Ooh,
Ooh,
The U for the U consonant E.
and the U that says U.
The A consonant E. A.
A, and we're assuming that the only long sound spelling they've learned yet is vowel consonant E.
Okay.
When I put O, that doesn't mean they're spelling it with an O. That's just the way I'm showing that it's oo instead of U. I would put all of the short vowel sounds in there.
Okay. That's a good choice.
Took it away and you can't see it now. Ah.
Are you going to put the endings in this part? No, because this is the discrimination. Never mind.
Right, yeah, okay. I just messed myself up. Oh no, maybe that's what I do. Yeah, there it is. Okay, have to get rid of it. Okay, so now there did again. Did I put in them on? So that means I would have to have at least one word with each of those sounds. And since vowel consonant E is the only way they've learned to spell those long vowel sounds, then it's not like they're having to make a choice. Otherwise, if I wanted, I might have to choose my words so that they didn't have to make a choice at that point. But, and please, those of you, I mean, we all do this differently, and that's one of the values of doing something like this, is that we get to hear from each other different ways that maybe we didn't know about. But, so don't hesitate. And chances are we're not going to need syllable practice or accent practice, because they're just doing one syllable words. And we could have some words on the pocket chart, some words without the pocket chart, again, depending upon where we are. And then for written encoding, again, there might be that on the pocket chart, they might not do any words on the pocket chart because they don't need to do that anymore. It might be that because this is a lesson that's not teaching a new spelling, that you don't have any oral encoding on the chart. Is this so? Thinking about working into your, what words would you want them to encode? And they don't have to be words that are in the they don't have to be words that are in the sentence. They have to be words that have the same sounds and concepts that are in the sentence. Any suggestions?
do prude,
Tell me again, I'm sorry.
prude.
Would you spell it for me? I'm sorry.
Yeah, P-R-U-D-E.
C-R-U-D-E. Okay.
P.
Paul.
P. I'm sorry.
Prude.
P is in pig?
Yeah.
Yes.
Ah, okay, got it. I'll have to put brackets around that. And then you would have to tell them what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Karen, that was nice to hear your voice.
It's good to hear yours, Nancy.
Well, so prude would be giving them practice with the sound that's in dude. Come on, guys.
Yeah, I know.
Well,
Well, is that what I heard?
SWELL.
Swell. I know I just switched between manuscript and cursive, but you'll have to excuse me because I forgot where I was. So you're practicing the FLSZ and with the L, which is what is in the word, but it's not the same word. Prude with the U, spelled with a U consonant E.
When I do these things, I usually use the words that are in the sentence.
You can. But you also, you can, I mean, you would, the one that I showed you for David,
Mhm.
the same phrase, we wrote each phrase and then the phrases went together in a sentence. But sometimes you don't because you want to give them, make them understand that they're not just learning to spell those words, but, and the other thing is that if I were going to, and I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, believe me, if they're words that are in the actual sentence, those are the ones I would probably put in written encoding. And I would have them there because I might think that I would have them spell those exact words because I anticipate they might have trouble with something about those words. Words like swell and prude, which have the same sounds but are not the exact same words. And I could put them in oral because they're still getting practice with the same things they need to write the sentence, but they're not the same exact words. And again, it depends upon the kid.
So if a kid is not secure, you repeat everything that's in the sentence in the work you're doing now. And then if a kid is more secure, then you can branch out and do some of the other spellings of other words that are similar.
Well, I would say yes, and other people chime in. What I would say is that your goal is to have them become more independent. So you might have some of both, some words from the sentence and from not from the sentence, and make sure that they practice all of those to become more automatic, and then make sure they know that they're using, how they're using what you're talking and asking them questions about to be sure they understand. I guess what worries me sometimes, and that I've seen this, is where the kids will only write exactly what's in the sentence, and then when it's time to write the sentence, they just copy what was already there.
Mhm.
And that's not our goal. Our goal is for them to be able to do it on their own, and they don't start out being able to do it on their own, but we just want to help them get there. But we don't always want to give them so much that they can't do that on their own. I sound like I'm a broken record, and I'm sorry if I.
No, it's helpful.
You other veterans, chime in.
I've had many of my students have to go back and rely on what they've written,
Yeah.
just to refer to it, and more than not. And so I have had them write the words from the sentence and code them and then add different suffixes and prefixes to them.
I mean, even with swell, you could have swell, swelled, swelling.
Correct.
You could make plural, but not here. That's not spelling, sorry. Sacrilege, okay.
And then I would absolutely get to complete.
And complete is tricky. And I think, I mean, I don't know what we're not going to be doing the decoding lesson today, but if there was a way I could get complete into decoding, I would, because then I get to draw their attention to that prefix COM, which isn't going to sound like com, but then they will have had a little bit of exposure.
But I'd probably teach as a 2-syllable word right now.
Oh, I wouldn't teach it as a prefix, but I'm just saying, I was calling it a prefix,
Yeah.
but
Yes.
that syllable, regardless of that, it doesn't say com. That's all I was trying to say. I
Correct.
just didn't.
Okay. I would just go through each word and make sure there was some way of me getting to each of those sounds.
Exactly. And then
Yes.
we have the kids actually, when they write anything that they write on their paper, we do teach them to decode it, to proofread it, to see if it
Yeah.
spells what they think it did. So if they omitted a sound, they can find it, which helps them to become a little bit more independent. But all the sounds, all of the concepts and sounds that are in the sentence you want to practice, just not necessarily in the same word that's in the sentence. And that will change. Karen, you want to chime in? What do you think? What are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking that we really have to know the kid to know how many of the precise words to get done and how many to just
Exactly.
give them the opportunity to practice an extension of the skill.
But I think that, as I said earlier, the main thing that I worry about is if they think they can only do what they can copy and they
Right.
don't realize what they have learned how to do. And if
That's
they
right.
don't try doing it, then they don't know they can do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if they get in the habit of looking all the time.
I mean, sometimes we even arrange the paper so that the paper's turned over. And so it's not, and so that they will try to figure it out. I mean, I'm not trying to be cruel. I mean, they can still turn it over if they need to. But the idea is that they find out they actually don't always need to because they know how to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
So would you be picking phrases from the sentence, or they might be from any of the words that were encoded?
It could be either way. It depends upon the kids and what they're capable of doing. It also depends upon how much time you have working with them and how much you've taught up to that point. But sometimes even when kids can say, I mean, I just imagine, the kid who chooses CK to spell the, and you say, why did you choose CK? And he says, because CK comes right after a short vowel sound, and I'm feeling very proud. And I say, which short vowel sounds did it come after? And he says, and you go, ah! So you don't know what they're thinking. The fact that they say words doesn't mean they understand the words they're saying. So we got to be sure about that. And so we're building, we're putting the scaffolding there to make them, to give them success, but we're also teaching them how to fly. So we want them to realize that there's a lot they can do on their own. And the fact that they wrote that word doesn't mean the only way they can write it again in the sentence is if they copy it.
Right.
Okay. So it seems to me like you're kind of had enough of the dude, but probably we should at least choose a couple of phrases. Why don't we choose a phrase that is directly from the sentence, or at least, and we'll choose one that has words in it that have the same concepts but are not the same words. Does that sound like it? Okay. And then I want to show you how we use that other paper, which for planning purposes, very useful. So there weren't any really red flag words in that they probably would have needed to write separately, but you could include the red flag words in the phrase.
The phrase I would choose would be on the swift raft.
Okay.
It's hard to say it.
Okay. And okay, so that's a phrase that would be a phrase that doesn't have any suffixes or prefixes. So it would be, this thing doesn't always, okay. So it would be here. So on the swift raft, is that what you said?
Yes.
On the swift raft. And so if you, when you dictated that, what would you want them, so you say the phrase and they say the phrase, and what do you want to ask them before they start trying to write it?
How many words do they hear? And you're doing it with an arm swing.
Well, actually, there are two ways to do that. Some people do it with an arm swing. We use the arm swing when we're trying to, that doesn't mean this is right and that other way is wrong. It's just a different way. When I want them to blend it together and read it smoothly, like for reading, but when for spelling, we do it, we kind of punch it out. So it's on the swift raft. And if it was on the swiftest, it would be on. You can't see me, so you don't know what I'm punching. Oh, well.
What do you mean by punching?
I have my hand, instead of using my hand the way I do for preparation for reading,
Yeah.
segmenting instead of blending. So I think what I have to do is, I don't know if I can. So if I unshare the screen, no, I did stop. Oh, maybe I can just put it, okay. I don't know, you can see my hand now, right?
Yes, I can see your knuckles.
Yeah, well, sorry about that. But anyway, okay, so on the swift raft instead of on, instead of that smooth. So it's like segmenting versus blending. But if it's a word that has a suffix or more than one syllable, then they would keep their hand in the same place, but they would, so on the swiftest raft, so they wouldn't move.
I have never seen that, what you're demonstrating.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I know a few people do it, but it doesn't mean it's a better way than the way you're doing it. It's just.
I'm just saying I'm very interested in what you're doing. That's what I'm saying.
And the reason, the reason is just that it is to emphasize the separate words.
Mm-hmm.
Remember to write all the separate words, whereas when they're reading, you want them to blend them into a more smooth.
Okay.
That's all. So, so on the swift raft, any other phrases?
The completely drenched dude.
That's a good ones too.
A completely drenched dude. And then you could say, oh, let me go back for 1 second. On the swift raft, you might say, and you could integrate phrase concept in there and say what question. So the whole sentence, I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but the whole sentence, who, the smug dude, which one on the swift raft action fell where into the pond, what else, connecting word, and another, it's not very active, but another verb, became, became, describe it, just two words that describe it, became completely drenched, because drenched is just an adjective that's described. It's not a great sentence, but or you could just have the smug dude on the swift raft fell into the pond, period. You wouldn't have to do the rest of it. And
For
then
many, that'd be a big lesson.
completely drenched. Yeah, these were just ideas to help give us lots of examples to play around with in coming up with different words and building the integrated lesson plan. You usually did our first follow-up of the year on integration, and then we were together in the same room and people could work together and come up with plans. But this is still working, so thank you guys for participating. I appreciate it. Okay, so on the swift raft, and then Mary, MJ. I forgot.
The completely drenched dude.
That's great. And but you know what's great about that? I mean, there are a lot of things great about it, but what just popped into my head that I love about it is that it makes it even clearer that completely drenched is describing the dude. It's the same dude that's at the beginning of the other sentence. He's still completely drenched, but then the adjective's coming before dude, and it's obvious that it's an adjective. When it comes after became, the linking verb, it's not as obvious, but it's doing exactly the same thing. Isn't anybody else as excited about that as I am?
Oh, yes.
Okay, thank you. Doesn't take much.
Now, this is the kind of stuff I totally love.
Okay. Anyway, me too.
And
So,
they're practicing it several times.
right. And
Those
so,
I think will be difficult.
well, that sentence is very long and would be difficult. It would be hard, but the idea, it's a lot easier if who, the smug dude, which one on the swift raft. If you could use verb or action, whatever you've taught them, fell where into the pond, and what else, and became describing words completely drenched. It's not. I think I'd be happier stopping after pond and then having a second sentence. He became completely drenched. But what I really love, MJ, and if you hadn't put the sentence together that way, I wouldn't have had the pleasure of being so excited about this, is the completely drenched dude just makes that so clear. Okay.
Well, great. Now I can sleep tonight with knowing my conscience.
Knowing that you made my day, right?
Right.
Okay, thank you. All right. So we didn't actually finish this, but can you find one that's not quite as awkward? Okay, how about if for number 7, just for dictating it in phrases? So who, I, verb phrase, 2 words, so they don't have to know that it's a verb phrase. I just told them how many words. Have dusted what? The Gothic throne, how? With a plume duster. So then when I dictate it, I can give them those clues. Who, verb phrase, what, how. Just like we do in structured reading, except this time it's developing that ear span for the phrases. And for that one, they wouldn't need to know any more for number 7 than we just talked about for number 6. It's still short vowel sounds, but it does have the suffix "ik," which is wasn't.
Could you say what you said again? I'm sorry. You were talking about reading the sentence in phrases and describing the who, what, where, that kind of thing. And then as you're having them write it, you're dictating it to them. I'm assuming that they have had some practice with this sentence, writing parts of it, or are they remembering the whole sentence?
Well, that's the thing. I'm going to make up a sentence now that isn't written here. The boy rode his bicycle into the park after dinner to find his cat. That's a lot of words. But if I say who, you know, what's the who, even though you only heard it once.
The boy
Verb,
rode
what,
his bicycle
where,
into the
Into the
park.
park
when.
I don't remember.
after dark.
That was close. After dinner.
Oh,
Why?
after dinner,
Why?
to find his cat.
Right. And you didn't even know I was going to ask you to say it. And it was a dumb sentence, but it's one that always pops into my head. And because it has all those different phrases that answer all those different questions. So when kids hear a sentence and they don't know how to chunk it, I mean, you're teaching them how to do that when they're reading, but it can be really helpful to them when they're listening too. And
I found that the task that you just asked to be done, I wasn't able to do.
the one with the second one with the boy,
No, to remember the sentence.
to the boy, but did it help with the questions or not?
No, because I would need to have read your lips and
It would help in the mouth.
tried to understand the whole thing.
Well, it's also something that you haven't talked about before.
Right. It's new to me.
It's the first, but I think that for kids who have a hard time with that piece, they're going to have an even harder time if they don't have that piece.
Yeah.
So
With practice, they get better at it.
right, and because you're also connecting or integrating, if you will, what you're teaching them to do in structured reading, and what you're teaching them, and how it's a strategy that they can use to try to remember. And the thing that I find with, I remember once there was a high school kid, I just started working with him, and he asked me a question and I gave him an answer and his eyes glazed over and he said, I can't remember all that.
Mhm.
I said, of course you can't remember all that. You don't have to remember it. You just need to understand it. You understand it, then you can put it into your own words and then you'll have it. But he said, well, I tried it in history class. I just try to remember every word he said. I said, well, how's that work? And he said, not very well. I said, I wouldn't be able to do that either. I would have to understand well enough to say it. I mean, even if you're taking notes, you can't write every word. You have to understand what you're hearing well enough to know what you need to write and what you don't have to write. Does that make any sense?
Nancy?
Yes.
But I think the part that is relevant to what we're talking about today is how we can connect dictating phrases or dictating sentences and connecting those the phrase concept back to what we're teaching them in structured readings, which
Yeah,
is
I know how to do that.
right. And so you're flipping it over, and now you're doing it in the other. And it when you can if you've ever given a sentence repetition assessment, a test that where the student's supposed to repeat the sentence verbatim.
Echolalia,
I'm sorry.
is that the echolalia?
No, well, that's a little different. Those are those are designed to be because of the sounds, but that's echoing, but that's mostly words or phrases. There were a couple of sentences, but it's just, so the sentences, it's just, can the kid repeat the sentence? And one of the things that will be a factor is how long it is. The other is how is the syntax and grammar and the complexity of the sentence. Some kids will not repeat it verbatim, but you know they understood it because what they say means the same thing. They might say kitten instead of cat, or change, but it means they have synonyms, but the meaning is the same. Other kids will start, they get the beginning, they miss the middle, and maybe they get the end, but what they end up saying isn't complete because they left a big chunk out of it. It's just a clue. So and I don't know why it took me so many years to figure this out. I mean, maybe I knew it but I didn't know I knew it. But we can only memorize by rote a certain amount of stuff. And if you don't understand what you have memorized, it's not going to be there when you need it to connect it to something else.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of the reasons having kids say back to it. I mean, when we teach them the 1-1-1 doubling rule to make sure they can say it and it makes sense and that they know what it means. And when they say it comes right after a short vowel sound, make sure they know what a short vowel sound is.
Nancy, on number 6, the smug dude on the swift raft, is on the swift raft a what?
It's not a what. A prepositional phrase is never a what because there's always a what in it. Because every prepositional phrase has an object, and that's a what or a who.
Oh,
It's an adjective. It's telling which dude. It seems like it. If you just took it out of context, you would say it's a where.
right.
But in that sentence, it's not a where because it's not modifying an adverb or a verb or another adjective. It's telling which dude. The smug dude on the swift raft, not the one that is in the canoe or.
Oh,
That was a revelation to me too. I was much too old when I really got that straight.
so that's all a who.
No, well, yes, because an adjective would be, that adjective is describing the dude just like a plain old, like smug is. And just like MJ's when she said the completely drenched dude. So the whole what is the completely drenched dude, but the simple who, oh, excuse me, or what, but the simple one would be just the noun. So dude is the noun. The smug dude tells what, but the smug dude on the swift raft also tells what, because on the swift raft is describing the dude.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's like 7 words that are a what?
Right. And you don't always want to tell, you need to tell them how many words at the beginning when they don't know what the heck you're talking about or what a phrase is.
Mhm.
But as you develop their understanding of the words that tell what, the words that tell when, those, then you want to not tell them how many words every time, because then they don't have to think themselves about that eye span to when you get, you were using, when you put those together, when you asked the question about on the Swift raft and you said, oh, so that whole thing is a what? You put together that all of that together tells what or who, depends upon if you're going to call the dude a who or a what, but either way, it's a noun phrase, the whole thing, because it includes the adjective that describes the noun. And that's what you were doing. But if we always tell them how many words, then they don't have to go to that next level, which is understanding why those 7 words stay together.
Thank you.
Does that make sense a little bit?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Sure. And that's one of the things I notice in looking at structured reading is that sometimes, I mean, believe me, I've had kids in 1st grade who did, I mean, not only did I have to tell them how many words, I had to go up there and put my fingers around the 2 words and tell it, or we would have not gotten anywhere. But you're teaching them how it works so they can do that on their own, making them more and more independent. Okay, so we don't have, oh, we have 4 whole minutes. Okay, well, let me just say thank you very much for putting up with me for this, because I thought this was a brilliant idea until I started putting it together. And I think that I'm used to doing it with people that I already know and have worked with and know who they're working with. And it was a bit of a challenge when I realized that. So thank you, Elise, for making me be able to hear them, because otherwise it would have been really horrible. And so I'm going to see if I can go back very quickly. And there's not much left here to show you, but I don't want to stop. Oh, this is it. Okay. Okay. So one of the things I would have done, I mean, as you see, there are more and more things involved in the sentences. So you see where the 1-1-1 rule and then the extended 1-1-1 rule and the sound and all those things, but we don't need to talk about that now. We can maybe do some more of those when we do the auditory one. So the purpose of this, you see the 2-line paper. So if you were in a teaching a student and you were still doing letter connections on the 2-line paper, then I would ask you to write, when you're writing your lesson plan in summer school, they would write whatever the kid would be writing on 2-line paper here. And then same thing, whatever the kids, if you're doing written auditory cards on 3-line, whatever that is. And then the next one has, oh, there was supposed to be a 2, 3, and a 5. Anyway, this is 5-line. So, but then you see the word, the word with the suffix, the phrase, you see it, it's so easy to see, and it's really easy for the teachers to see. It also helps them to plan how many pieces of paper the kid needs and when it's going to turn over, because what you want on one side versus another side. So that's why we just made those little miniatures for them. And then I'll just tell you this quick story, and some of you probably have heard it, but this was a kid I worked with a long time ago, and it was he was in 7th grade, and it was the last session that I was going to be teaching him. I knew he didn't need to see me anymore. He wasn't so sure. He made me promise to save a spot just in case after he started middle school. And I did save one, but I knew he wouldn't need it. But he said, well, since this is the last session, Nancy, I think I should be the teacher and you should be the student. And I said, well, that's interesting. No one's ever proposed that before. Okay. I said, but you have to have a lesson plan. He said, of course, as if that was a silly question. So I sat in his chair. He sat in my chair. I wrote my journal 5 minutes before we started. Then he gave me my cursive letter connections, and then write what spells Jeanne, shun, Asian, j, s, and Then he gave me, I thought he gave me the word popper, and I thought, oh, he wants me to practice the 1-1-1 doubling rule. So I encoded pop, told him why I needed to double the consonant, did a very nice job, I must say, and I wrote it. He said, that was a good try, Nancy, but the word is pauper, someone without much money. I said, okay, so I tried again, and I got it that time. Then he did want me to practice the Y rule. He gave me wealthy, then he asked me to change it into a word that meant most wealthy, more wealthy. Then he gave me depression, and he reminded me to think about the word before it was a noun, depressed, so I would know it was SION. And then he was a kid, very bright kid, and he used to complain at first about the fact that English wasn't spelled the way it sounds, and I'd give him my spiel about the beauty and history of the language and all that we'd miss if words were spelled only the way they sound. He said, the next word is a tricky one. There are people who wish English was just spelled the way it sounds, he said. And he gave me a spiel much better than when I ever gave him about why it was that way. He said, Nancy, what does midst mean to you? Being very careful after my little problem with popper, I said, in the middle. He said, very good. What do you hear in the middle of middle? I said, D. He said, remember that when you spell midst. I was impressed anyway. Then he gave me the phrase, in the midst of the depression. And my sentence, the wealthiest man on the block turned into a pauper overnight in the midst of the depression. Now that is a really well integrated lesson plan. We never talked about writing lesson plans, but clearly he got it and he knew exactly what I was doing and did it better than I could. So I thought that would be a nice way to end. The other things that you have in your, they're just same old thing about the summary of the advantages of Slingerland, which I know all of you know anyway, and that's that. And they're the bibliographies. The reason I'm doing this is so I can show you don't tell me it's not there. I think it isn't. It's not. Okay, I'll send you the link. I'll send all of you the link to the matrix maker, the one, remember the VERTVERSE? It's not in this bibliography, but I'll send it to you, I promise. And thank you so much. I hope you come back.
Nancy, before you go, there were a couple of questions from Edie.
Oh, okay.
Let's see, what's the first question is, what reading pre-assessment do you recommend for middle school students? What sources for high interest reading for middle school students? That's number one.
Okay, well, first of all, there are so many sources now, and at least for the moment, they're free sources. One of them is ReadWorks. If you just Google ReadWorks, and if you have trouble, then you can send me a message and I'll send it to you. But I don't think you're going to have any trouble getting it. And they're free sources on lots of different topics, all different ages. And they're not all, as you know, when you try to structure things, some things are not written in a way that really lend themselves to structuring, because they just don't write sentences that are very structurally sound. But they're not all going to be perfect, but there seem to be, the most of the ones that I looked at were pretty good. And then another one, but you have to be careful with this core knowledge, which is, I don't know how long it's going to be free, but for the moment, they were offering free access to all of their reading material. I think this is my opinion. There's no reason to agree with it, but I think that I prefer, for the most part, when I'm doing structured reading, to choose academic or content area text, so I can be teaching the academic vocabulary that they might not be as likely to come across without specific instruction. And but there are certainly plenty of other sources, but it again, and you want to choose something that the student is interested in, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't have them read other things that they might not know about, or maybe they'll become interested in. Something that I used to use that I liked, and you may be familiar with, it was available through EPS, which is now Oh, I just forgot. But if you put at EPS dot,
Is it school specialty,
It's
Nancy?
school specialty.
it is school specialty, right? But if you put EPS dot something, it'll still go. It still pops up. But is the Jane Irvin, ERVIN? Reading for content and speed is also a good one. And there are no pictures on that one, so, but they also don't write it in indented paragraphs, which is not a huge problem, but you just need to be aware of it. But the Jane Irvin, there are lots in varied, what is it? Jane Irvin, varied content and subject matter. Again, it's not going to be hard to find once you get to the EPS website or but there are lots of different topics and you wouldn't have them reading all the selections. They're relatively short. So if you're only seeing students a couple of times a week and you don't have time to do not every single day like you would in a classroom, then they have that advantage. And it usually has some of the comprehension questions. I mean, they'll ask not just what is the main idea, but which of these choices is too broad, which of these is too narrow. So it offers opportunities to talk about what that means and why a too narrow or a too broad is not the best choice for a main idea. That's more than you probably wanted to hear. Okay, next question, sorry.
This is another one from Edie. It's what spelling pre-assessment do you recommend for middle grade students?
Well, just about, well, if the student has if the student has been assessed, if there's been some sort of an evaluation, either a psychoed evaluation or even an educational evaluation, and you have access to the kinds of errors they made. Otherwise, I mean, there's the test of written spelling, there's the new Wyatt has just come out, but you also get a lot of information just from anything that the student has written independently. But if you want a standardized test and all you're looking at is spelling, then the test of word spelling is as good as any. It's not going to tell you everything you need to know. The other one that is, it's never good. It's never, the wide range achievement test is not something you would ever use by itself to diagnose a kid. But because it's a wide range achievement test, it has a wide range of difficulty in terms of the words, and there are enough of them have recognizable base elements that you can get a sense of their morphological awareness too. And it's, it works equally well for word recognition because it's wide range, but there are lots of other tests that do the word recognition, not as many for spelling. I don't know if that helped or not, but, and then once you have your idea, if you want a standardized test, once you've done that, based upon what you know about the what the student does and doesn't know, the screening that you may have done, the informal screening, then you could choose what you expect to teach within the next, say, 6 to 8 weeks and make up a spelling test just the way we do on the first day of summer school. And that's what you're going to be teaching for those next 6 to 8 weeks. And then you give a test either with those words or words with the same elements at the end of that time. And then you give another one of what you expect to do in the next area. So that's more of a CRT that you're doing on your own. But for a standardized test, I mean, the Wyatt has one, the Woodcock-Johnson achievement has a spelling test, and the Kaufman, they're all standardized spelling tests. There are there are a lot of words that are less predictable, but you can still analyze the errors on the test. I mean, you get a standard score, which then you can compare when you test again a year later, but you also get information on every single word the kid misspelled about the kind of error it is and what he needs to learn that he hasn't learned yet. Again, that was probably more than wanted to know. I'm sorry, Edie.
Okay, one more it looks like. This one's from Laura Davison. Are there any decodable readers that you really like?
There are a lot, well, there's so many out there and some of them aren't so great. Some of them are pretty low qualities and it's not always easy to tell. But at the moment, the Flyleaf decodables, which are beautiful books and are free access. I don't know how long it's going to be, but for now, you go to Flyleaf Publishing, they were offering access to teachers for no charge. So I don't, like I said, I don't know how long it's lasts. And then the Language Circle books, Language Circle is from Project Read. What are they called? Oh, it's somebody's, it's a girl's name, and it just left me. But it's Language Circle, and I know a lot of Orton Gillingham teachers use those. The primary phonics books, yes, they go very, very slowly, but it's very clear. The main thing is if you're using decodables for kids to practice what they know, you want to have a series that's sequenced such that they're not going to throw things in there that you haven't taught yet, because you wouldn't teach it for another month or so, because then then it's not decodable. Laura, if you send me an email, I haven't checked all of these, but there was a source that someone sent that was a more generalized Orton Gillingham decodable options, but you'd still have to look at each one to decide which ones you could use. So I haven't vetted all of them to see how I would feel about that, but the tried and true ones that I mentioned, and Flyleaf is very good.
Thank you.
They have pictures, but they aren't pictures that are telling the kid the word. I mean, they aren't those pictures. The pictures in Flyleaf are not designed to have the kid guess what the word is from the picture. They're designed just to add to the beauty and joy, fun of reading the book.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's see here. I think we are good.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Elise. Thank you, Nancy.
You're very
Thank you
welcome.
so much.
Okay.
It was
Very much.
All
so
right.
much
We'll see
fun
you
to
guys.
talk to you.
See you guys next week.
See you in one.
Hey,
Okay.
take care of your back, Elise.
What was that?
Take care of your back.
I am. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will, right before I forget it, I'll send everybody the matrix maker.
Okay. All right.
All right. Good night, everyone.